Harsha runs Microsoft's $2 billion cloud scale analytics business in North America. His team enables several Fortune 500 companies leverage Microsoft's cloud and partner with Microsoft on their cloud and AI initiatives. Prior to becoming a senior director at Microsoft, Harsha held several positions within the company and led few of the largest strategic commercial cloud partnerships for the company. Prior to Microsoft, Harsha led ERP and analytics team at high-tech companies such as Oracle, Retail, and IBM's Sterling Commerce. At the age of 24, he co-founded India's first predictive analytics appliance in the education space. Harsha has an MBA from Duke University, is top 10 ranked worldwide, and was from the first graduating class of BITS Pilani Goa campus. So his 2004 T6 ES 326. Over to Harsha. Thank you so much.
Vicky sir and the alumni relationships team. Thanks a lot for having me here. It's an absolute honor to be back on campus. Over the next 40 minutes, basically this is your time. This is my way of giving back to the campus. Of the many millions that I've made, I'd say a lot of the foundation started here on campus, and just as I'm grateful for my parents, my brother, just as I'm grateful to my school, I'm incredibly indebted to this phenomenal institute. And I'll tell you my own story of like how I've really leveraged BITS as a platform to do a lot of things. Find my first job, take mentorship when I needed to make a decision between continuing to run a startup that was struggling versus going to an MBA. I co-invested in some of the largest real estate deals in the US with BITS. So, needless to say, I'm incredibly grateful for this platform, and hopefully over the next hour, 15 minutes, whatever time you guys would find useful, I'll probably do less prepared remarks versus actually you guys asking me questions, so we can get to really tough questions that you may have. There's a lot that Vicky sir said in his remarks about like what I've done for Microsoft or where I've studied, etc. I would proudly say I failed many times over with the startup. I was not a brilliant student back at BITS. I was not a brilliant student at Duke, and where I went for my MBA. But I figured out a way. I think in a true BITSian way, I would say I figured out a way. And I think more than anything else, I'll kind of talk about like my own journey. And hopefully you guys get something valuable out of this. I remember, being from the first batch at Goa, we barely had we had no seniors. We had faculty members like Dr. Vicky to talk to, and then once every year, one Pilani guy who was probably vacationing in Goa would come, and just to access the guest house facilities, he would say he would come and speak to the students. I remember like one distinct alum coming in my first or second year, actually second year, and he talked to what would then be a class of this size, because we had no alums to kind of go to, or no seniors. Anytime an alum would come on campus, rooms would be super packed. And so I remember that conversation and what kind of an impact that left on me over the years, and what that conversation really taught me versus all of the lessons that I've taken on campus, etc. And hopefully there's one of you out there who may pick up on one or two things. I was telling this story, in all the classes that I've attended at BITS Goa, there was one econ class that I went to, and one of the professors said, the way to really think about an asset is, unless you can transfer the ownership of its cash and cash flows to your sons or daughters, it's not an asset that in its truest sense. And I don't know if anything in my life made much more of an impact than that one statement in how I thought about investments or how I thought about my own career. So there are these moments in time where you would, hopefully you'd get something out of the conversation that would be a healthy thing that I know is my own journey and probably sharing a few lessons from my journey. What I want you to do during this conversation is really challenge me with tough questions. My wife's brother is a Bitzian. So we've paid our fair tuition fee. The thing that is wrong about all of the other Bitzians are they're from the Pilani campus. I'm the only Goa campus graduate, and I jokingly tell them, they often tease me that, hey, we're like the sons of God, you're the stepson. And I tell them, like, I think it's high time you bring all of your 4 paychecks and we'll compare with mine. And then just sort of me talk to a lot of my life lessons in a XY graph, because I think that explains a lot of what I want to articulate and communicate to you on the conversation today. The first thing that I'll get out of the way is really the significance of CGPA. And this is I don't know if the charts, that's clear. It was a very, very important question for me when I was in your shoes. At the end of the day, all of us human beings are optimizing for something. Right? Some of us are optimizing for money, some of us are optimizing for CGPA in the focus of optimizing for money. Very rarely at the age that you guys are at, you would actually optimize for things that really matter, and you don't need to, because when you get to 35 plus, you'll start realizing that life's much more than the initial offer that you landed from BITS Pilani Goa campus. The value of CGPA in general decreases significantly over time, and in an accelerated curve. It's super relevant in the first few years of campus life or post-campus life. It's super irrelevant when you get to my stage. More so because after your inflection point, and I'll talk about inflection point as a point in time you have to think about. After you hit your inflection point, it hardly matters anymore. One of the top takeaways from why I produced or put up this chart is, in my own time at BITS, I've made choices of selecting particular electives and not selecting particular electives, not understanding this chart. Because the short term seems super, human beings are great linear extrapolators. You sort of figure out what happened in the recent past, you sort of extrapolate it to the near future, and you can't really see anything beyond that because of either the ability to not extrapolate or just not having any context as to what really happens. And sort of one of the intents of producing that is that. But that is also true for relevance of formal education. Here's a guy that went to BITS, went to Duke University, started my life at 27 years old with about $300,000 in debt, mostly from my education. And I'm telling you, 8 years after I graduated from my MBA, that the formal education that I went through is extremely irrelevant. And I'll tell you what's relevant from that as well. And the reason you have to remember that is not because you don't need to attend classes because the CGPA is irrelevant or value of formal education is irrelevant. It matters more about how you learn what you learn than what you actually learn. It matters more how you learn what you learn than what you learn. And the way I reflect on my own time at BITS is every decision that I make today, whether I'm investing in something or I'm making a decision for Microsoft and the cloud and AI business is a mental model that I've developed somewhere in between when I was 18 years old and 25 years old. Most of my learning or cognitive mental model development and decision making happened during that time. When you get to 30 plus and sort of become leaders within tech companies, you have to be two things. You have to be trustworthy, and trustworthiness comes from integrity, all of that stuff. But you also have to be trustworthy in terms of making the right judgment calls. Just like Rohit Sharma has to make a right judgment call, you have to develop those muscles over long periods of time, and it's really helped me do that. And I'll sort of talk to you about how it's really helped me do that. I wouldn't rank myself anywhere academically smarter than any of those guys. But in the jugaad side of things, I was better than 4 or 5 of them put together, because I knew a way to figure things out. One of the interesting stats, and this is probably the last statement I'll make about myself, is when I graduated from Duke, I guess we all live in relativity and comparison. I was probably there were 42 Indians, other than ABCDs, which I don't consider them to be Indians, unlike the newspapers consider them to be Indians. Of the 42 Indians, I was probably ranked 10 from the bottom. I had the highest number of offers graduating from Duke University of all the 400 students put together, despite my visa limitations. One of the things that BITS specifically has taught me is really how do you really and especially the club activities, how do you figure out what your strengths are, and how do you know your weaknesses, sort of over-index on one versus the other. And so my whole experience at Duke was focused on who I know and expanding that circle, because it didn't matter. As I went into Microsoft, again, what I knew started making more relevance and becoming more important, because those were early years of post-MBA experience, so I had to establish credibility. Now there's not a job. So today, when if I have to become a general manager from a senior director, nobody's going to interview you for those roles. You either get it or don't get it. So, but in the early years at Microsoft, what I knew really mattered. And what I knew, the foundations were back at BITSCO. It was in those classes that I attended. So here I am, a programmer who thought my education was irrelevant because I didn't feel I was fit into that group of things or activities that need to happen. And then fast forward 8 or 9 years, I'm back at the same scenario where I'm leveraging my education. And so the top takeaway from that comment that I made is you have to put yourself in scenarios where you're going to classes that matter to you in the long term, than trying to optimize this for the short term. As boundaries on how much you'd have to sacrifice family life, etc., to figure out your potential. I don't want to spend a lot of time there because it's super irrelevant for you guys right now. But that's how the mental model shifts over a period of time. Mistakes that I did during my BITSCO journey was there was this class by a professor called Ashish Asgekar, and he was teaching image processing. My first, how many of you are curious about my GPA journey at Microsoft or at BITSCO? Alright, I'd have to give it to you. So, my first sem, I was a 6 GPA. I laugh at this because it is so I've gone to a prep school. In a prep school, I knew I was not the smartest. Somehow I got into BITS. It was my liberation moment. Like, I don't need to go to class. I can do whatever I want. There was, for the first 6 months on campus, there was no internet. So we were without internet, mostly without power. and we were trying to like get Cisco to lay the fiber and connect our hostel rooms to. So we were without internet, and I still managed to get a 6 GPA without internet and no useful mobile data. Imagine what I'd have if I went to college today. I don't know, I'd probably be still studying my first sem. So I was something like 6.2, 6.3, 6.7 by the time I ended second year. But this was where I got super lucky. I knew, and this is where like a lot, remember I talked about the other 570 people that I don't think have really maximized their opportunity. This was where I got super lucky. In my third year, I figured out I need to get really serious. It was not just about the non-academic stuff, it was also about the academic stuff. And I don't know, how many of you are Mahendra Singh Dhoni fans? I think during one of the speeches that Mahendra Singh Dhoni gave after, I think it was championship trophy or some trophy that he had won, some ICC championship. He said, a good leader needs to know when to peak. And I would tell you, like a lot of my classmates had significantly higher GPAs lead going into third year. Remember I told you shouldn't optimize for the first job. The first job that they landed was not in the company that a Bitcoin should work for. That one and a half year really put them in a scenario where the curve that that showed you, exponential versus linear, they've since been on a linear path. They've never had that inflection point. Not that there's anything wrong, right? So money or where you are in corporate ladder is not any measure of how successful you are. But that is what you need to work for right now, because that is why you are here on campus. Long term, it may not matter. Happiness is what matters, and you can get that being a fisherman. But that's more philosophy. But like real practical terms, they came into the third year and they just really weren't as intense as I was. And most of the guys that graduated with not so good, they could have still recovered, but unfortunately one thing led to another. I don't want to brood on that more than what I've already done, but which is basically the fact that you have to really figure out like when to peak. And during that time, because I was trying to maximize my GPA so I could qualify for companies that would ask for a minimum 7.5, I took a couple of courses that I knew I would get an A and skipped on image processing and artificial intelligence, although they were core to what I was supposed to do. They were electives for information systems. And that came back to bite me later, because those courses would have been useful for my startup, for the Oracle job that I was doing, but I didn't go to any of those courses. So when I went to my MBA, I decided I wouldn't repeat the same mistake. I said, finance is the thing that I hate the most. I will force myself to go to finance classes. So I got into classes like valuation, etc. And then lo and behold, in my second or third year at Microsoft, I realized I wasn't getting job satisfaction from the work that I was doing. I decided at the core, my father is a commercial real estate developer. That DNA is still there with me. I said I need to start focusing on real estate. And then I said, where do I want to be when I'm 40? I don't want to care about a job. I wanted to be extremely financially independent to a point I would choose to do what I wanted to do with my time. And I started like pivoting my career to actually making investments and doing real estate. And so when I started my real estate and investing journey, the class that I hated the most when I was going through my MBA was the class that helped me the most. Because you actually need to value assets. And today, no class, there's this one case study, the Chicago Cubs case study, where they basically ask you to, in most US MBA schools, they give you a case study before night and basically ask you to study and come prepared to class to discuss. There's no lecture given during the class. So they actually gave us a handout and basically asked us to evaluate a student as a Chicago Cubs stadium, which is a baseball stadium in Chicago. And the equivalent to that would be a Chinnaswamy Stadium in Bangalore. Basically say, go value that stadium. What would it be? So you have to you actually do a discounted cash flow model to understand what the stadium would be valued at. I learned so much in that 15-20 minutes of discussion that my entire $300,000 MBA was worth it. I probably make, every year I make as much just based on that one 15-minute class. So that's a long way of saying it's hard for you to look into the future and say what's relevant, what's irrelevant. But sometimes when you want to take the easier route out, you have to take the harder route out. Because I know this won't stand the test of time. It's super relevant for you right now, but it's long term not the thing that matters the most. The things that matter the most, reflecting on where I am today, is one is health, who you marry, both in terms of the business side of who you marry, your co-founder, and your personal side, who you marry, your spouse, your wife. And the third thing is your principles. And this, again, not very relevant, but remember this statement. When I hire for people, I look for three things. Are they smart? Are they hardworking? Do they have integrity? If they don't have the third, the first two are extremely dangerous combination because they work against you. I would rather hire someone who's dumb and lazy if they're not, they don't have honesty, than someone who's smart and extremely hardworking because they work against you. So your principles in terms of how you lead your life matter a ton as you grow. With that, I'll pause and sort of take questions, and I can talk about any topic you want from open to questions. Yeah.
So what's the right time for MBA? Just after graduation?
Yeah, great question. The process of going to an MBA is about eliminating, in my opinion, eliminating your career options, and you have to figure out your circle of competence before you go into an MBA. The rat race in India forces you to think about IIMs or any of these schools much earlier than, if I had to do my MBA all over again, it would be after I worked for Microsoft for a couple of years versus the timing that I did, which is after 4 years in 2012, after 4 years after graduation. Because I didn't learn enough about the outside world and its ways for me to be able to apply myself in class and sort of be able to absorb and take in everything. So, but again, in India we are super influenced by other people getting it. The challenge with delaying your MBA is your intellectual prowess declines. There's a cognitive decline that happens from when you are 20 and when you are 25. It's pretty natural. You can't, an average human being, I'm not saying you, an average human being can't ace the CAT the same way at 25 as they can at 21. So there's some of that factor that goes in when you choose an Indian MBA school. But a US MBA, I strongly recommend thinking about getting a global MBA because the world is going to increasingly become global. It's not going to become more local. Although the short term with Russia, Ukraine, all that stuff that's going on, it may seem there's a nationalism power and there's going to be a lot more local, but long term, people will travel more, people will study. So I don't expect my kids to go to BITS or probably choose to go to an undergrad in some foreign university or something. So increasingly, the world will become global. So my own, with all admitted bias, my own recommendation would be go somewhere in between the 5th and the 6th year, but give your CAT or GMAT or GRE the 3rd year after you graduate, so your cognitive decline is not impacting your ability to take it. So you said there's no way for me to think about Berkshire Hathaway, which is what the company it's a holding company. They basically find managers that allocate capital and sort of managers that run individual businesses. And so he's in the business of not making rational purchasing decisions, but with managers that he likes. The reason I give you that background is in the context as to what I'll tell you next, which is the fact that he has to judge the ability of a manager. He says there's not an education degree, there's not an IQ test. It's hard for him when Solomon Brothers, which was a financial company, was in dire straits. Warren Buffett was asked to pick the next CEO for Solomon Brothers. He said it was extremely, even the guy who was the best in the world for the last 70 years in allocating capital, he couldn't figure out between 3 graduates or 3 people that were interviewing who was the best guy for the role. But the only indicator he said that led him to believe long term was the fact that the age at which you start a business is extremely deterministic, but it has to be organic. You can't force that. It's extremely deterministic of how successful you'll be in your life. So I know I didn't directly answer your question, but the answer is it has to be organic. Is it important? It is important, but it has to be organic. I would say not the Duke MBA, not the BC, like who I married, actually helped me a lot more than anything else. Hopefully you recorded that, I can show her. So $300. And I had $17 or $18 in December 8th of, and 9th was my birthday. And for 17 days straight, because the loan got disbursed on the 1st of January, for 17 or 18 days, we practically ate nothing but rice and whatever pickle we had. One of the most embarrassing moments was I couldn't even afford the furniture to invite my MBA friends over to dinner at my house. I slept on the carpet for the first 2 years. So the reason I tell you that is $200,000 seemed a lot of money when I was graduating. There were days when the time it took for me to come from Fuqua, which is the Duke University MBA campus, back to my apartment was about 11 minutes, and the break was 35 minutes. So 11 and 11 minutes, 11 minutes in, 11 minutes out, parking, all of that together, 22 minutes, and I had 13 minutes to eat, and the meal costed me $7 at the campus, and I could not afford the $7. And I come from an extremely ultra-wealthy family in India. One of my principles is I never wanted to touch my father's money. By any standard, my family is super wealthy. The challenge, so we got into that situation, so it seemed a lot of money back then, but now when I reflect back like this, I really feel like if somebody said, hey, I have an investment, you need to pay $200,000 for it, and it'll compound your money at 10 or 11% for the next 10 years. I can do that before the speech is over. So again, the reason I give you that whole story is what may seem really big in the short term is not really what you need to focus on long term. I don't know if that answer the question or not. So don't not do an foreign MBA just because it costs you a lot of money. So by the way, the 2.7 lakhs that you guys are spending per semester here, to make you feel even more bad about the 2.7 lakhs, we spent $30,000 per semester here on campus 20 years ago. In the time that I spoke here, probably would have been able to pay the entire amount that we had. So what you are so obsessed about in the short term about how much you're paying, 20 years from now you'd be standing here and you'd exactly make the same statement, which is in the time that I spoke here, I probably would have addressed all the semester fees that I've been cribbing about. So don't worry about the two. Not that I'm saying you should not worry about money, but don't try to. And one of the lessons from my frugal living back on campus was I would have enjoyed the more of the MBA experience had I done it different. I have no idea, man. I have no idea. That one stumped me. Like I mean, as you can see, like I enjoy so much of this that it's hard for me to imagine anything else. I'll probably close with this happy note. If you asked me, in 2007 or 2008 when I was graduating, this is how the playbook would play out for you. You'd lose your hair, get married, put on 20 or 40 pounds, but you'd have all of this. I'd say I'd still go do this. It's been extremely rewarding, and I think most of it is because at its core, I enjoy what I do, which is both my job and what I do outside my job. And it happened through a process of elimination rather than selection. Some of it naturally, some of it by chance, and some of it consciously. So with that, I just want to thank you guys for, hopefully this is somewhat useful and you would remember some of this as you kind of make some major decisions. But I'm optimistic about the future. Like, I would say this even in front of an IIT crowd. Fuck the IITs. It's I mean it with the most. I admire them for their intellectual abilities. But intellectual abilities only get you to a certain point in life. It's the jugaad that matters more than anything else. There's no place else that teaches jugaad than BITS. Thank you.